Alright, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the Paladin cards for the new expansion. This will be the last video in the, I guess in the playlist if we're doing something like that. Maybe I'll put it all into one playlist. But yeah, this is the last reveals as far as I'm aware for the Great Dark Beyond. Going to be a few days before I think anyone's able to play with these cards, but yeah, once they're out, maybe I'll put out some videos actually trying out the cards, but we'll see how that all goes. We'll start off just going in order, right? First up, we've got Orbital Satellite. And sorry, let me just say as well, I'm still feeling a little bit under the weather, so my voice will be a little bit hoarse, let's say, or whatever. So bear with me if you can. Orbital Satellite. 1 mana, discover a Draenei. If you played an adjacent card this turn, discover another. This card is good if you can activate the adjacency effect during the turn that you play it. If you can't, it's play a Draenei, or discover a Draenei and then be able to play it for 1 more than you would normally be able to play it. Which is not the worst option potentially. It depends on whether or not there are Draenei the Paladin wants to have access to that are in classes the Paladin is not. If that's the case, then obviously this Orbital Satellite potentially gives you access to some of those. Now it is a Discover and there's a lot of Draenei, so it's unlikely you're going to get the specific ones that you want. But if there's something that would be like game-changing for Paladin to have, then this potentially gives you the option to get it. Obviously, if you can get the adjacency bonus, then you're getting double value out of this, which is like pretty decent. With the range of things that Draenei can do, getting a double discover probably gives you a good opportunity to get something that you would like to have. So I could see this seeing some decent amount of play. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about that one. Next up, we've got Lumia. This is a 6 mana 9/9. Lifesteal, and after a hero takes damage, they become immune for the rest of the turn. Now, the 6 mana price tag on this leads me to believe that they think that this secondary effect, the after a hero takes damage, they become immune for the rest of the turn, is a negative effect, right? Like, you see discounted discounted values for stats on cards like Dirty Rat or whatever, or the one that gives 4 armor to each hero, right? This, to me, seems like a great anti-aggro card, right? If your opponent has 5 minions on the board, you drop this. If they don't have a card like, let's say, Assassinate, or, likewise, maybe even Execute in Warrior requires them to do 1 damage before, but if they don't have an option to instant kill this, they're going to spend potentially a lot to do so, right? And it does put a fair amount of stop on their aggro board, right? Because they can take like their highest attack minion and attack your face, but then the rest of the stuff on their board is just kind of sitting there, right? So I could see this being pretty good. And then the alternative there is, if they want to, they can attack in with all their minions, putting you back up to full health, and then try and build their board back up. But therefore, this seems like it trades quite a lot. So it's a great card if you're trying to slow the game down to get to some other, game-winning tool. And if this was just the only minion that you have stuck on your board for like a couple turns, it could still do 9 damage to the enemy hero every single turn, which is not bad, right? And while it's doing that, it's healing you for 9 as well. So yeah, it seems like this requires attention immediately kind of card from your opponent, rather, which to me seems like it's pretty decent. I could definitely see this seeing a decent amount of play in the new expansion. Next up, we got Libram of Faith. And to talk about Librams, we gotta just discuss briefly, I suppose. Librams are back. We haven't seen them in quite a while in Standard. Obviously, I think that Libram Paladin is still kind of a thing in the Wild set. It's interesting to see them bringing back this mechanic. If I'm reading one of the other cards correctly, I don't know exactly how many. Maybe I could just quickly look this up, actually. Let's go to the wild cards here and search up Libram. So we got Libram of Wisdom, Libram of Clarity, which is not... Oh no, this is one of the ones that's in this expansion, isn't it? Yes. Libram of Divinity, Libram of Justice, Libram of Faith, Libram of Hope. Okay, so every previous Libram, except for Judgment, is going to be available in some way in Standard with this set. And we'll get into the specifics of that as we go through this. But one thing to note is that a big part, and actually here, let's just look at these other cards first. Interstellar Wayfarer and Interstellar Starslicer are the cards that allow you to discount Librams. So we should talk about these before we talk about the Librams, because obviously the value and effectiveness of these is going to directly influence whether or not you can play the Librams. Because each Libram that is new in this expansion has this bonus effect. If this costs 0, do something. This one is give them +2/+1. So obviously, because the highest cost Libram in this set is 6 cost, you would want to be able to get 6 discount off of your Librams at some point during games, right? So let's just talk about that. Interstellar Starslicer is a 3-mana 2/3 weapon. Battlecry and Death Rattle reduce the cost of your Librams by 1 this game. Now, the effect of this is nice, like the Battlecry and the Death Rattle is good, although because it has 3 durability, it takes a few swings to actually get rid of it after you've, like, you know, got it. And it's lower attack than you would want to see on a 3-mana weapon. Now, obviously, that's because the effect is so good, theoretically anyways. So does this see play? Obviously, if you're trying to run a Libram deck, you're going to be running, I think, 2 of Interstellar Starslicer and 2 of Interstellar Wayfarer. But it is a little bit tough to say if this is worth it enough. I mean, having 3 durability on a weapon, it depends on the matchup, right? If you're into a deck that's summoning high-cost minions that have big amounts of health, then this thing is just, like, it's a wet noodle. I guess you just swing it into the enemy hero every turn. If you're trying to just discount your Librams, you could tutor out 2 copies of this, summon the first one, maybe swing it once or twice, or probably just once, and then the turn afterwards, put another one down to replace it, therefore activating the Death Rattle and the Battlecry at the same time and reducing you down to 3 off of your Librams. Now, after that, you still have to swing 3 times to get the secondary Death Rattle, but that does put you in a pretty decent spot if you're trying to get something like Libram of Divinity, which we're going to talk about later. The biggest issue with this is that 3 durability, I think. And because of this card specifically, this might be make or break for Librams. It's hard to say whether or not this will be good enough to make Librams good, but let's just, let's look at the other one here. Interstellar Wayfarer is a 4-mana 4/2 Draenei. It has Divine Shield, and its Battlecry has reduced the cost of Librams by 1 this game, of your Librams by 1 this game. The stat line's fine. The Divine Shield makes it decently not a bad drop on 4, I believe. And then obviously the Battlecry, if you're trying to play Librams, you would also want to play this. So I could see a typical mana curve potentially in a Libram deck being, tutor out your Interstellar Starslicer as soon as possible. Potentially tutor out your Interstellar Wayfarer as well, so you could potentially spend turn 1-2 on that. 3 Interstellar Starslicer, 4 Interstellar Wayfarer, potentially 5 Interstellar Starslicer again to replace your first one, and that would put you at 4 off. 4 off of your Librams, therefore allowing you to then drop Libram of Divinity for free. There's a question of whether or not it's worthwhile enough to do all this to get this effect. But yeah, I think Interstellar Wayfarer as a card by itself is pretty decent. I think that Interstellar Starslicer is up in the air a little bit more, but it doesn't seem bad necessarily. Libram of Divinity. No, you know what? Let's go back to the first one, because this one is more interesting to talk about. But we'll get to it. Libram of Faith is the 6-cost holy spell. Summon 3/3/3 Draenei with Divine Shield. If this costs 0, give them Rush. Now, this is not the worst thing if you could get it down to like even 1 or 2 mana cost or whatever, right? If they don't get Rush, it's still a lot of stats on the board with Divine Shield, so they're kind of protected a little bit as well. I would say that this is like, obviously it's like really, really good if you can play this on 0 mana, summon 3/3/3 Draenei with Rush and Divine Shield. You know, you could do a lot with that. And you still have the rest of your turn to do other things because it costs 0 at that point, right? It reminds me of the, what the heck is the Death Knight legendary? There's no way I'm going to be able to easily find this. But let's just see. Rarity, legendary, card type minion. Where is it? Oh, it costs the most. Reska Pit Boss. By the time that you actually end up playing this, it generally costs 0 or close to it unless you're like desperate. And so therefore you can like attack in, steal an enemy minion, and then still do your turn. With the Libram of Faith, I see it being something like, you know, let's say your opponent drops like an 8/8 or something, and that's not like that threatening necessarily, but it, you know, something with a lot of stats. If 9 points of damage or less can deal with that, you drop Libram of Faith for free, all of your Draenei potentially attack into it, and then you do the rest of your turn. Maybe you drop something else, like, you know, a legendary or something else, right? So I think this is pretty good if you can get it discounted all the way down to 0 consistently. Even if you can't, I could see it still having usage, because at such a low cost, getting that amount of stats on the board is still pretty nice. But obviously you want to have the rush effect to make it like super, super good. Next up we got Interstellar Researcher. This is a 2 mana 2/2 Draenei, Battlecry, and Spellburst. Draw a Libram. So if you were to run 2 of these in your deck and got the Spellburst on both of them, you would draw all of the Librams that you could potentially have in your deck at the start of the game. Now obviously if if you're running 2 of these, there's the potential that you draw into your Librams before you even end up drawing both of your Interstellar Researchers, meaning that you don't get full value off of them. But actually, wait, No, I'm not correct about that. This will only draw you 4 out of 6 of your Librams. Yeah, because each one draws 2. I am hallucinating. I don't know what the heck I'm thinking. That kind of, honestly, like, it doesn't make it better. But it definitely improves it in my mind, because you could potentially draw into some of your Librams early and still have this give you, like, full value in quotations or whatever, right? Yeah, so this is, like, you know, same as Interstellar Wayfarer, Interstellar Starslicer. If Librams are good and there's a deck that, you know, can effectively use them, then Interstellar Researcher has a firm place in there, I think. Next up we got Urel, Beacon of Hope. 5 mana 4/3 Draenei. Rush and Death Rattle get 3 different Librams from an older timeline. This seems pretty good to me. The stat line is a little bit lower than what you would want to have on a 5 mana. You know, you compare this to the 5 mana. Let me try and find this as well. 5 mana Rush, Minion, keywords, Rush. I think it's 5 mana. Anyways, it might be 6, and it is any rarity. Burrowbuster, yeah. 5 mana, 6/5 Rush. With Battlecry Excavated Treasure, which is probably the most, you know, equivalent that you could get. So you're losing 2 off of each stat with this, right? Like, instead of 6, it's 4. Instead of 5, it's 3. But I think that the Death Rattle makes it worthwhile. You're getting 3 Librams. Potentially, probably by the point that you would drop your L, you would hope that you've discounted it so at least Libram of Wisdom is free for the rest of the game. So after Urel dies, you drop a Libram of Wisdom on any, and like every single card that you play after that basically gets a Libram of Wisdom, because it gives the death rattle that it brings the Libram of Wisdom back to your hand, right? Libram of Justice is the 5 mana one. Probably it'll be around 3 or less by the time that you're playing Urel, at least 3, 2, whatever. This has the effect, equip a 1/4 weapon, change the health of all minions to 1. The weapon is Overdue Justice. I believe this used to see play in Libram decks. The secondary effect on this is obviously like super good. The primary effect is whatever. Potentially the nice thing about Libram of Justice, if nothing else, is that it could activate the second death rattle on your Interstellar Star Slicer, therefore reducing the cost of your other Librams. So I could see, you know, obviously that's pretty decent. Then Libram of Hope. With the current cards available, you're never going to get Libram of Hope down to 0, but at max it could be 3 cost, which is still pretty good for the effect, right? Restore 8 health, summon an 8/8 Guardian with Taunt and Divine Shield. Yeah, playing this on 9 would be abysmal, but playing it on 3 or even potentially up to like 5 is pretty decent, right? It's a good amount of healing. It's a big body to block, you know, in front of whatever to try and keep yourself alive. I think that this is pretty good. I think that if anything, the stat line will make it a little bit hard to run, but because of the Librams that you get, you're going to get a decent amount of value out of it. And of note, it's a Draenei. You can pass this death rattle onto Velen as well if you so choose to do so. Next up, we got Libram of Divinity. 4 mana, holy, give a minion +3/+3. If this costs 0, return it to your hand at the end of your turn. I think if there's going to be a card that is broken from Paladin this set, this will be it. Obviously, you can't just get to 0 cost on this like super early in the game, because like, you know, like I was talking about with the mana curve, you potentially need to get all the way to like turn 6 or 7 to make this 0 cost. But once it is, every single turn you're able to just put 3/3 onto any minion, and then if you draw both of these, you're putting 6/6 onto any minion that you choose for 0, and then you do the rest of your turn, right? Easily activates spell bursts, easily gives you, you know, turns any minion into a threat. I see this being super, super strong. But you do, like the other Librams and stuff like that, like this is all leaning towards, at least to me, a much slower deck than I remember Librams being. Sorry, 1 second. Just had to mute cough there. I remember Librams being a much faster archetype in the past, but this feels very, you know, like there's a almost tempo feeling to it until the point where you're just like, you know, if you got your Libram of Divinity down to 0 and then we're just in top deck mode, as long as you're top decking minions, you're still like, every minion that you put down, irrelevant to what it is at least like a 7/7, right? That's not bad. So I think these are probably pretty good, but yeah, I think they're pretty good. Next up, we got Libram of Clarity. This is a 3 mana holy spell. Draw 2 minions. If this costs 0, give them +2/+1. I think this is pretty good as well. This is one of the ones that's a little bit harder to judge. 3 mana to just draw 2 minions is, I mean, you could say, you could equate that to Arcane Intellect, to be fair. That's 3 mana, draw 2. And this is like more of a, you know, specific thing than just draw 2 anything. But by the time that you, I mean, not by the time, but ideally you would have this at a lower cost. I'm trying to just think generally, is this worthwhile to play if it's not at 0? And I think if you're in a situation where you need to get more stuff in your hand and you still haven't gotten this to 0, playing this at 1 or 2 is not terrible. Depending on, like, I guess it depends on what point in the game you're in, right? Like, playing this on turn 3 for 1 would be impossible, unless I'm mistaking things. Because Interstellar Star Slicer costs 3. If you were playing this on 4 for 2, I guess, would be the earliest you would reasonably play this. If you have a lot of low-cost minions in your deck and you just need to draw into them, I could see it still being an alright choice, because then, you know, you play this, ideally you draw 2 1 costs, and then you just play both of them. But, yeah, I feel like you want to wait until this costs 0 to get that bonus effect. Yeah, it could be a good way to put Steam back in your sales as well later on in the game, so it seems pretty decent to me, in my opinion. We can skip over these two because we've already talked about them. Last up, we've got Celestial Aura. 6 mana holy spell. While you have exactly 1 minion in play, its attack and health are 10, lasts 3 turns. What the heck are they doing with this? Seems decent, I think. I mean, just limiting yourself to 1 minion is like a weird state, but playing around some kind of, like, this type of effect, I could see this going into, like, you know, because it feels almost like more of a control-y thing, right? But I could see this going into, like, potentially like a, you know, big setup deck, like, you know, can New Ziliax have Wind Fury on it? Hold on. I do not see Wind Fury as an effect. Okay. Because if you could, like, I mean, still, that would probably cost a lot of mana. I don't know if this is good. Obviously, like, I guess the other situation you could play something like this is if you have, like, a lot of taunt minions or lifesteal minions where you could afford to just have one thing on the board and your opponent still has to mess around with it. So I don't know if this is good. It feels too slow at the mana cost that it is, right? Because, like, I mean, I guess you could play this on 7 and play, like, something with Taunt and Divine Shield. I don't know if there's anything like that that costs 1. It's, this is a weird one. If in the right situation, this could be, like, absolutely abysmal to play into, but it just feels very strange. The limitation of also, like, exactly 1 minion means that, you know, I don't know, like, you can't put anything else on your board, right? It seems obvious. I guess, if nothing else, you could always play this on 8 and then just hero power, but then you've got a 10/10 with no added effects that your opponent probably just ignores and goes face and kills you, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I can't get a good read on whether or not this is going to be bad or just kind of like whatever. I don't think it's that good, though. I don't think it's that good. And those are my thoughts on the Paladin cards for this expansion. I'm interested to see Librams come back. I'm going to be honest with you, Librams used to be very frustrating to play into, and it was an archetype that was around for quite a while, and, like, not, I don't know how long it's been. It hasn't been that long, I feel like, since Librams were in Standard. It's worth noting as well, Hooves isn't on this one, but these cards, the, like, reducing the cost of Librams, will likely make Librams much more meta in Wild, and potentially something like Libram of Divinity, Libram of Clarity will see play in those Wild decks as well, right? Actually, Interstellar Researcher as well. I think the Librams were maybe, I think they're kind of around the level that they're kind of Wild meta, but I don't think that they currently are near the top. But these will probably throw that back into the meta in Wild if they don't see play in Standard. And if the Librams don't see play in Standard this expansion, I would expect them to add more in, either in the mini set or in future expansions, just, you know, as Standard rotation kind of continues on. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, like I said, interested to see how it plays out. If anyone that's watching disagrees, has any opinions on this stuff, if you hate Librams, let me know in the comments. I try and always respond to them, and I don't know. So I've gone through all these cards now, all the cards from the new expansion. So I've got two things that I want to do going forward. One of them is play with the cards in this expansion. So I'm going to be opening a ton of packs on release day, and then I will try and put together something cool and, you know, put a video out for that. But secondarily, I don't exclusively play Hearthstone. I play quite a number of card games, and if you've read any of my descriptions, you would probably know that, because I think I put it in there. So I might, like, pivot is a weird word, but I might try and expand the repertoire a little bit. I was thinking potentially something along the lines of, you know, Hearthstone for Pokemon players, Hearthstone for Yu-Gi-Oh players, Hearthstone for Magic players. You know, interesting videos like that where I go into like a Hearthstone match where I have, like, you know, maybe against like a AI or whatever, so I have an unlimited amount of time, where I can kind of explain the mechanics, but from the perspective, or for the perspective of someone that plays those other card games. Because obviously, like, every card game has different mechanics, and that's what makes them unique and interesting and, you know, fun to go back to when you play multiple of them. But I know from personal experience, going from one to another can be, like, super intimidating. Like, I have had Pokemon cards for, you know, most of my life, and I only got into trying to play with them, like, 3 or 4 years ago. And it's not that difficult to play, is the crazy thing. Like, it's totally doable. But, yeah, like, when you are so used to, like, a mana system, it can be difficult to go to something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, where there isn't necessarily an equivalent. I guess Pokemon's got the energy and stuff like that. But anyways, this is all just rambling. It doesn't need to be at the end of my Paladin video. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, anything like that for, you know, future videos as well, give me a comment for that. And, yeah, I'll catch you all next time.